guys, it's Danny. Today we are talking all about Tolumnia orchids. Yes, due to popular request, it is about time to redo the very old care tutorial that I already have on my channel. It's a good tutorial, but I think 6 or 7 years has elapsed. My camera is definitely better and I do know more about Tolumnias now because I gathered more experience. So today I'm gonna tell you all about how to grow these beautiful orchids in your home. They are super easy to care for, talk about the basics of what type of environment they require, and also give you some insider tips and tricks that I'm sure will make your life a little bit easier with them. So don't forget to give this video a like if you end up enjoying it. It really helps it out. And hey, why not subscribe? I post 3 times a week and it's completely free and it's awesome, if I do say so myself. But before we go ahead and talk about Tolumnias, it's time for the orchid of the day. Ta-da! The orchid of the day is a little segment that I will introduce in my videos since we gave up the Orchids in Bloom series, which was not super popular on my channel, but I do still want to show you beautiful orchids that are in bloom, just to give you some ideas for your wish list. And today's orchid is the wonderful Bulbophyllum Elizabeth and Buckleberry, one of the oldest orchids in my collection. And just look at the flower. Can you believe this is an orchid? Again, I do have an older tutorial on this orchid. I will link it to it down below, but this is again a very easy to care for orchid, very similar to Phalaenopsis. It just requires a little bit more water, bright shade or artificial light, intermediate conditions, whatever temperature you have in your home and you're comfortable, it will like it as well. Regular fertilizer, potting in whatever type of medium you like best, but it doesn't really like to dry out way too much. The pseudobulbs will shrivel when it's a little bit thirsty. Other than that, super easy to grow. The flowers don't really smell much like anything, so don't worry about that. It doesn't smell bad, and it's just a wonderful orchid to grow. Foliage looks really pretty as well. Bit of a rambler, you need a wider pot, but I think it's worth it. But we're not here for Bulbophyllums, we're here for Tolumnias. And some of you might already know that my Tolumnias used to be potted in something else. Well, they kind of outgrown that setup. So I've kind of been repotting them into something that can hold a little bit more water. We're gonna repot one today as well, just so you see how it's done. But let's just start with a few words about Tolumnias. Tolumnia orchids, formerly known equitant oncidiums, are tiny little epiphytic orchids native to the Greater Antilles, which is a sub-region of the Caribbean, but also extending a little bit up and a little bit down, so a little bit in North America and South America. Now, the vast majority of these orchids in cultivation are hybrids, and this is because this orchid is easily hybridizable and it grows relatively fast from seeds as well, unlike other types of orchids. Now, if you know the flowers of the Tolumnia, you can make a little bit of a connection with the oncidiums, hence why it was once called an oncidium, but nowadays it has a genus of its own, and surely if you take a look at the entire orchid, never mind the blooms, it really doesn't look like an oncidium, right? Well, it is a sympodial orchid, it just doesn't have pseudobulbs, it has fans. The growth pattern is very similar to other sympodials. Regularly new fans are produced, and unlike a Phalaenopsis which continuously grows leaves from the crown, from the top, this one will eventually stop. That is totally normal. It just means the fan reached maturity. Another new fan will start to grow. Typically, after it blooms and after everything is done, a new fan will grow, and the fan that blooms will typically stop growing. Just like sympodials, the vast majority of new roots are produced on the new structures. So as they grow and still immature, the new fans will start to produce new roots, which are very important for the entire orchid, just like any other sympodial. The older structures will still hang on to their roots, and those roots can branch out, but as the years pass, 2, 3, 4 years, you will notice that the older roots will wither off slowly and surely, which again is very normal. So if you can just ignore the fact that it looks a little bit like a vanda with a lot of keikis and treat it just like a sympodial, you're going to be just fine because it truly acts like a sympodial. One of the greatest things about Tolumnias is that they tend to stay small. This is slightly relative because each hybrid is just a little bit different depending what parents it has. but definitely you will not have a super tall orchid like a Cattleya or some of those very tall oncidiums. And I have here two orchids to show you that look very different. Here we have a tinier Tolumnia orchid. This typically does not grow taller than this. And here we have quite a tall Tolumnia. Actually, this is the tallest I've ever seen a Tolumnia get. Kind of similar to this one, but generally speaking, Tolumnias do tend to stay pretty tiny and compact, and they will not get taller than maybe 30 centimeters or so. That would be about 12-13 inches. But because they tend to stay very tiny, they are wonderful for tinier shelves, for windowsills, for people who don't have a lot of space on their shelves and want a plant that can deliver a super beautiful bloom show while taking up as less space as possible. Because the party trick of this orchid is the bloom show. It is quite spectacular. First of all, the flower spikes are super tall in comparison to the orchid. Now again, the length of the spike can vary from hybrid to hybrid. It also has to do with the health of the orchid, but generally speaking, flower spikes are much taller than the plant itself. The flowers as well are absolutely gorgeous. They're really tiny if you take them individually, but they can be produced in pretty large numbers. Bonus, the flower spikes can actually branch, and another bonus, they can rebloom on a secondary spike, pretty similar to Phalaenopsis orchids. Who doesn't want reoccurring blooms on the same flower spike, am I right? Of course I'm right. So the beautiful bloom show, together with the fact that they stay rather tiny and also the fact that they're quite adaptable to home conditions, makes Tolumnias one of the best miniature, let's say, orchid you can have in your home. So since we're talking about growing these orchids in a home, let's talk environment. Well, when it comes to environment, we're in luck. They don't really need special treatment. They don't really need greenhouse conditions, humidifiers, humidity trays, all sorts of stuff we usually do for the sake of our plants. They're actually not really bothered with any of that. Just like Phalaenopsis, they're really tolerant to whatever home conditions you have, as long as you follow a few criteria. First and foremost, temperature. These guys really like it on the warmer side. Now, they don't like heat. Trust me, they don't. I've tried it. They're not as heat tolerant as Vandas or even Cattleyas or Dendrobium Phalaenopsis. They actually really hate heat. But warmth they absolutely appreciate, and they do grow much faster in warmer conditions than more coolish intermediate conditions. If in your environment there are cooler seasons which affect your growing space, don't worry, it will not harm them as long as you keep temperatures above 15 degrees Celsius. You'll have the Fahrenheit equivalent on the screen. But I do find that in lower temperatures, they just don't grow as fast as in warmer temperatures. And when I say warm, I mean anywhere between 22 degrees Celsius and 28 degrees Celsius. I find that this is the Goldilocks zone in which they thrive, they grow really nice, they bloom, and they don't get stressed. Next up, light. These plants like a lot of bright light. Very similar to Cattleya orchids actually. And this is a little bit paradoxical. They're not hot growers, but they enjoy bright light. Well, in their natural habitat, they grow at higher elevations where the ambiental temperature is really not that hot. They also benefit from a lot of moisture and a lot of humidity on a regular basis that gives them water. Because, as we will see, they're very prone to losing water actually. And at the same time, they grow in almost full direct sunlight. In a home, I like to grow these on a southern or western window. An eastern window can work as well, as long as you shelter it from direct sun. What I like to use are some sheer curtains. Many of you know them already. They let a lot of the sun pass through, but it's not stark sun. So the leaves don't get overheated, they don't burn, and that worked great for me up until now. And more recently, I just placed them under my grow light. I don't have experience with this. We're gonna see how they do. Hopefully they do well. I'm gonna put a note in the description at some point when I draw some conclusions. I would rather go with natural light for now, if you have the possibility, because I know for sure it works, but I think pretty strong grow lights or placing the orchid closer to the grow light will do the trick as well. They don't strike me as very hard to bloom orchids. They've always bloomed for me, even when I didn't give them all that much sun. When it comes to humidity, as I was saying, they will not fuss way too much. They can grow in whatever humidity you have in your home. However, you have to know that the lower the humidity, the faster they will dehydrate. I do discover that with Tolumnias, it is very, very important to maintain a good watering regime, which we'll get to, because they tend to just lose water very fast through their leaves. And in no time, if the pot remains very dry, the leaves become wrinkly and you will see your Tolumnia is just not all that happy. The good news is if you give it a good watering, it will plump back up and pretty much no damage will happen. They're very robust orchids actually, but if you have higher humidity, this issue will not be so striking because what humidity does is actually limit transpiration. The drier your home is, the more the orchid will transpire, hence will lose water and will need more frequent watering and more attention. The higher the humidity, the less that will happen. But as I was saying, a Tolumnia can be perfectly happy in no matter the humidity you have. I have them in so many types of humidity, it's not even funny. Even in 10% humidity in the middle of summer, it was fine, as long as they maintained them well watered. And since we're talking about watering, this is a pretty big subject. They don't really like being dry all that much. Yes, they can dry out and they will tolerate it just fine, but if you plan on keeping them dry for 3, 4, 5 days or more, they're really not going to like it. This will be, of course, dependent on humidity, as I was saying, but also the environment as well, the potting mix you have, and all of that. As you can see, I choose to grow my Tolumnias in a mixture of bark and sphagnum moss, and this is because I do have quite a warm climate. So if you live in a similar climate, maybe in a more of a desert type of climate, sphagnum moss and bark will do absolutely fantastic for them. If, however, you are in a cooler climate, maybe further up in the north, here in the northern hemisphere, you can get away only with bark and they should be absolutely fine. Also, you can use plastic pots with ventilation like I use here, or you can use a clay pot like I have here. I actually used to grow these guys in clay pots and it worked out just fine until they grew a little bit too much and the pot is actually full of roots, which make everything just dry much faster because unglazed pots, they do transpire a lot of water. So the choice of pot and also the choice of medium will have to depend on your environment first and foremost, but also on the materials you have available, what you're comfortable working with. Pot size, again, will have to depend on these elements. As you can see, I have a rather big pot here and a tiny pot here. These two work the same for me because I just know how to treat them. If you're not entirely sure what type of pot to use, you can always go for a tinier pot because it will not retain as much water. Just make sure that all of the roots fit and also you have some space at the top for new growth to grow. Some of you might know that the rule is provide 2 years worth of growth. Well, if you don't know how fast your orchid grows, how do you know? Well, provide 2 centimeters. This is about an inch on the growing side of the pot and that should be enough for at least a year. If you discover that this type of a pot dries too fast for you, use a bigger pot, use a plastic pot, just switch it up as you go. The bottom line is these are epiphytic orchids, treat them just like any other epiphyte. Just make sure you keep an eye on them so you can gauge how fast they dehydrate in your environment because that's just going to be different for each and every one of us. So there is no way for me to tell you water it once a week or every 5 days or every 10 days. It will depend. But just so you know, they don't like to be dry for way too long. It's okay to let them dry and actually this will prolong the life of your medium. Let them dry out, but when you see the medium is dry, give them a good watering. They will appreciate it. And look at the leaves. They're very succulent. You will notice the wrinkles immediately when these guys are starting to get dehydrated. Provided you have roots, give them a good watering and you are good to go. All right, so now let's move on to repotting. Alright, so I do have a few tips for you here as well. So as you can see, this little orchid is potted in a clay pot. I cannot squeeze on the pot and make the roots just snap from the sides of the pot. So what I did was soak the medium in the pot, and in this way the roots became just a little bit more flexible and a little less prone to damage. It's always highly likely to have root damage whenever you're using unglazed clay pots, but that's okay. As I was saying, we're more interested in the new roots rather than the older roots, which might already be attached. The future of the orchid is always in the new roots, just like other sympodials. So what I'm gonna do is try to place my fingers under the orchid, under the rhizome practically. Don't ever try to pull any orchid by the leaves or even by the stems, because there is a high chance you're gonna have the leaves or the stem in your hands. You don't want that. So go under the orchid and just pull up. And there we go. Oh, I managed to not damage any root. Do you see that? This is what a good soak can do. And actually my eyes on my camera now. If the image is unstable, we should be cautious of this, lady. What are you doing here? Mommy has to film, honey, okay? We have a very important tutorial to film. You wanna stick around a little? All right. Okay, so this is what a good soak can determine. Minimal root damage. But as I was saying, if a few roots are broken, it's typically just fine. Don't worry about it. Now, let's see if I can remove this medium with one hand. Do you wanna help? It's not working out, little Maya. Do you mind if mommy puts it back? I'm gonna show you the end result, I promise. All right, so I'll continue removing this medium from the root system. As you can see, I did use quite a lot of moss. And the only reason why I'm choosing to change the setup from a clay pot to a plastic pot now is because these orchids are just too thirsty for my environment. They did okay for a year, now it's time for an upgrade. So after we remove as much of the medium as possible, here's a little trick that I like to do. I like to keep my collection tiny, but not number-wise, but just individual size. So I do have a video in which I explain more about what I mean. Check it down below. What I typically do with sympodial orchids is just get rid of the older growths, which are highly unlikely to produce roots and new growths. Obviously, you can always have new growth from the older side of the orchid, but the chances of that happening are kind of slim. And actually, if you remove it, you're practically creating a division. So if you want to propagate an orchid, you can do so with the older growth. So what I like to do is just make my orchids a little bit tinier, just to save space. And what I do is remove the old growth. And excuse that noise, Maya is now eating. And actually, this old growth has a little new shoot here. Now, you can place this in a different pot, and in this way you can actually propagate a Tolumnia orchid. It is the same with any sympodial orchid, but Tolumnias do tend to grow pretty fast. So this you can pot separately, and hey presto, you have another little plant. You can share with a friend, or you can keep it, whatever you like. And this plant will just stay a little bit tinier, a little bit more compact. One thing that I didn't say, older growths, once they are done blooming, they will not rebloom from the very same fan again, but the new growth might. Now, when removing the medium from the root system of a Tolumnia, I would be very careful. These orchids can get severely set back. If you manage to break 1, 2, 3 roots, that's okay. And if you remain with quite a good root system, there's nothing to worry about. But I did have rootless Tolumnias. And unlike other orchids, I find that these guys take a lot of time to bounce back, which I find very surprising because they are very easy to care for and generally speaking pretty robust. But when it comes to setback, it takes a while. So as gentle as you can be with the root system, which is quite tiny, as you can see, very comparable to Oncidium roots, the better the orchid will be in the end. So I'm not gonna bother removing every little tiny piece because this medium is not all that broken down actually after 1 year. I'm not going to reuse this medium, it's partially degraded. I'm going to use brand new medium, so I'll be back when the tray is cleaned. So the new pot that I will use is this plastic pot. It's a little bit larger than the previous one, but that is absolutely fine. As I was saying, if you know how to work with the medium and with your watering regime, size doesn't really matter. Let's think about it logically. The roots, they don't know they're potted, they don't know they're confined. In nature, the roots extend on those branches as long as the eyes can see. They can grow as much as they feel like, without any type of confinement. So the plant itself doesn't necessarily benefit from being confined in a tiny place. The person who will benefit is you, because generally speaking, tinier pots retain less water. If this is something you need, then tinier pots are for you. If you don't know exactly how to gauge the water, again, tinier pots are for you. But if you're experienced and you know that bigger pots help you in your environment, use bigger pots, it's absolutely fine. I'm gonna use the same type of medium, a mixture of sphagnum moss and bark. I'm not gonna use as much sphagnum moss as the previous pot because this is plastic. It doesn't lose water all that fast, but the materials are the very same. I'm gonna make sure to place the older part of the orchid towards the side and the newer part in the middle, just to offer as much space as possible for growth. Just like other sympodials, Tolumnias have directions of growth which will extend across the surface of the pot. So you wanna give them space to do so. If you're not sure where the direction of growth is, just center the orchid in the pot like so, and you're good to go. Rather than placing newer growth at the very edge of the pot, just center the orchid if you're not sure. Now, in order to make the bark fall, when you have a mixture of moss and bark, you can work a little bit with your fingers and just press down a little bit, but it's not a good idea to press all the way down because you're gonna compact the sphagnum moss, and that's not okay. So press down a little bit to arrange the bark, and if you discover you have some big air pockets trapped in the pot, get a bamboo skewer, insert it on the sides, make sure you're not poking any root, go on the side, oops, my pot is a little broken, that's okay, and just wiggle the medium around a little bit, and you'll notice that the bark will fall into those air pockets. And in this way, you're not compressing the sphagnum moss, you're still keeping it airy and fluffy and just perfect for orchids. And you're also covering that super big, massive air pockets, which the orchids will not mind. But again, if you have a pretty warm environment, it can make the pot dry out a little bit faster than you can water it, and your orchid can get a little dehydrated. I'm also using slow release fertilizer. I find that Tolumnias are not very heavy feeders, but they're not very mild feeders either, because once they take off, they take off. They grow pretty fast. I top it off with bark just to prevent algae on the top of my pot, which again is just my typical drill. Many of you know it already. See, I don't treat Tolumnias any different from this point of view. And ta-da, my orchid is potted. The last thing that I will do is just write the date of repotting on the tag, or actually the date in which I added the slow release fertilizer. I'm just gonna put the month and the year, because once a year I do refresh the fertilizer. I just drop in some new little beads. This fertilizer is supposed to last for about 9 months or so. So if I replenish it once a year, it's enough for this orchid. So what I'm gonna do is water it really well. This will make the medium fall into place even better. Put it in a decorative pot and just pop it onto my shelf. Speaking about watering, a few more words about this. The technique of watering doesn't matter. Whether you like to run water through the pot or soak your pots, whatever works out for your other epiphytic orchids, even Phalaenopsis, with the type of medium you're using, that's how you should water your orchid. But of course, there is a degree of trial and error, so you have to start from somewhere. First off, try running some water through the pot. If you feel like it dries out way too fast for your possibilities, try soaking it in water and see how that works out. There is no magical formula for Tolumnias, just like there's no magical formula for any other orchid, and that's the truth that many people don't want to tell you. It is trial and error. Just treat this orchid like any other epiphyte, and keep in mind the fact that it doesn't really like drought, and you should be fine. At some point you will find the magic recipe that works for you. So that is about it for today. Here is just a look at my Tolumnias and how I grow them together with some other plants on these shelves, which do receive some natural light, but mostly artificial light. As you can see, I have a few on the lower shelves as well. So I will let you know sometime in the future. I will add it in the description. I'll let you know how they do under artificial light, but I think they will be fine. I think they will bloom just fine. So with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. Hope you learned something new, and let me know in the comments below. Do you like Tolumnias? How are you growing them in your environment? Let us know more about what type of conditions you have for these orchids and how you make them thrive. With that said, I think it is time to end. Again, thank you for hanging out with me today. Hope you have a great day. Subscribe to my channel for more orchid videos, tutorials, experiments, updates, and other fun orchid subjects. If you wish to support the channel, do consider becoming a member or visit the merch store linked down below in the description. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook. It's always nice to stay in touch there as well. And I'll see you all next time. Bye!